Welcome to Motivational Humanity. You are not alone. Before we say a single word today, I want you to sit with a question that very few people have ever had the courage to ask themselves. How much of your life have you spent staying in places, in relationships, in situations that were slowly, quietly draining the light right out of you? Not because you were weak, because you believed that if you just gave a little more, loved a little harder, waited a little longer, it would finally become what it was supposed to be. My name is Brene Brown, and I am a psychologist and emotional intelligence expert. And what I want to tell you today, what I need you to hear, is something that took many of the wisest women I have ever known decades to understand. The sunk cost fallacy, that is the psychological term. But we are not going to stay in textbooks today, because what you and I are going to talk about is something far more personal than any textbook. We are going to talk about the moment you finally give yourself permission to stop paying for a debt that was never yours to carry. Here is something that every psychologist knows, but almost no one talks about at the dinner table. Human beings are not designed to give up on their investments. We are wired, deeply, evolutionarily wired, to believe that the more we put into something, the more it must be worth preserving. 20 years of marriage, 15 years of friendship, a decade in a job that has been eating your soul one Monday at a time. Your mind says, I cannot walk away, not after everything I have put in. It would mean all of that was wasted. The past does not become less painful because you keep choosing it in the future. Staying in a toxic situation does not honor the years you have already given. It multiplies the cost. The goofy, every single day you remain is another day you are not spending in the life that is actually waiting for you. I want to, something that lives inside so many of us, especially those of us who were raised to be the strong one, the dependable one, the one who holds everything and everyone together. I want to name the voice. You know the one. The voice that says, who do you think you are to want more than this? The voice that says, think of how much you have already invested. Think of what people will say. The voice that says, maybe if you try harder, maybe if you were different, maybe it is you. That voice, darling, is not wisdom. That voice is the echo of every time someone made you feel that your needs were an inconvenience. That voice is not protecting you. It is keeping you small. There is a word I want to offer you today, a word I believe is one of the most underused, most misunderstood words in the English language when it comes to leaving. That word is grace, not the religious kind, though that is beautiful too. I am talking about the grace of allowing yourself to be human. Grace says, I did the best I could with what I knew at the time, and now I know more. Grace says, I am allowed to have grown beyond this. I am allowed to choose differently now. Grace says, leaving is not betrayal. It is sometimes the most honest and loving thing you can do for yourself and even for the other person. Leaving what drains you is not giving up. It is finally respecting yourself enough to stop auditing your pain. Share that, please. If you know one woman who has been quietly apologizing for her own exhaustion, center this. Right now, let us go deeper now. I want to talk about the sunk cost, not just as a concept, but as something you may be living inside of right now, today. The sunk cost fallacy is a bias that tells us because we have already invested so much, we cannot afford to stop. We see it everywhere. The woman who stays in a marriage for 30 years because she cannot imagine explaining to her children, her church, her neighbors, that it was not what it appeared to be. The woman who has given the best years of her friendship to someone who only calls when she needs something and falls silent when you need her. The woman who has worked for a company that has taken everything she has, her creativity, her boundaries, her Sunday evenings, and still does not see her. She does not leave because leaving would mean admitting that all of that time, all of that energy, all of that hope was spent, and that is simply too painful to face. So she stays, and the cost keeps compounding. I want to say something about time because I think we misunderstand it deeply. We act as though time already spent belongs to the situation we spent it in, as though it is a debt we owe. But time does not belong to places or people. Time belongs to you. The years you gave were not wasted. They shaped you, but they do not obligate you to keep giving what you no longer have. This is the moment many women I have worked with describe as their first real breath. The moment they understood, I do not owe the past my future. 20 years of marriage does not mean you owe 20 more if the marriage has become a sanctuary for one person and a sentence for another. 15 years of friendship does not obligate you to absorb someone's toxicity because of what the first 3 years felt like. A decade of service to an organization does not mean your dignity is part of your employment contract. I want to be specific now because generalities feel safe, but they do not heal you. What does toxic actually look like? Because toxic is not always dramatic. It is not always raised voices and slammed doors. Sometimes toxic looks like the dinner table where you rehearse what you are allowed to say before you say it. Sometimes toxic looks like the friendship where you always hang up feeling smaller than when you called. Sometimes toxic looks like the job where your ideas are brilliant until they are someone else's. Sometimes toxic looks like the relationship where your healing is always scheduled for after everyone else's needs are met. And the most insidious kind, the kind that keeps the most remarkable women stuck the longest, is the kind wrapped in love. Toxic wrapped in need, in history, in the belief that you are the only one who truly understands them. That is not a sanctuary. That is a beautiful cage. A cage is still a cage, even when it is decorated with your history, your loyalty, and someone else's tears. Here is something I need you to know, because it will make the leaving, if and when you choose it, feel less like failure and more like what it actually is. Leaving a toxic situation, even a terrible one, feels like grief. It feels like losing something. And that is not a sign that you made the wrong choice. It is because you did lose something. You lost the version of that relationship, that job, that friendship that you always hoped it could become. You are not grieving what it was. You are grieving what it was never going to be. And that, my love, is one of the most profound and under-acknowledged human sorrows. Psychologists call this ambiguous loss. Grief without a clean goodbye. Grief for something you cannot bury because it never fully died in your heart. And it is real. It is legitimate. It deserves to be honored, not rushed, not bypassed, not buried under productivity. But here is where it begins to shift, because inside every true, grounded act of leaving, there is a gift. And the gift is this: you get to reclaim yourself. When you leave a situation that has been slowly rewriting your sense of who you are, when you withdraw your energy from the place that has been hemorrhaging, something extraordinary begins to happen. You begin to remember things about yourself you had almost forgotten. You begin to remember that you have opinions, that you have preferences, that you have a laugh that belongs entirely to you and nobody else. You begin to notice that the headaches are less frequent, that you sleep differently, that food tastes better. These are not small things. These are your body's first whispers of welcome home. I want to talk about courage now, because I think we have deeply misunderstood what it means. We have been taught that courage is loud, that it is confrontational, that it announces itself. But the courage I am talking about today, the courage required to leave what is slowly erasing you, that courage is quiet. It is the courage to have the conversation you have been rehearsing for 3 years. It is the courage to stop answering the phone at 11 p.m. from someone who only calls in crisis. It is the courage to write the resignation letter, to book the attorney's consultation, to say to your best friend of 20 years, I love you, but I cannot do this anymore. That kind of courage does not roar. It exhales, it does not make grand speeches. It simply decides, and the decision made from a place of clarity and self-respect is one of the most powerful acts a human being is capable of. The bravest sentence you will ever speak may not be, I love you. It may be, I choose me, said quietly to yourself in an empty, once you have decided, once that quiet bedrock decision has been made, the real work begins. And the first and most sacred part of that work is learning what boundaries actually are. Because somewhere along the way, many of us were taught that boundaries are walls, that they are cruel, rigid, unloving. But a boundary is not a wall. A boundary is a property line. It is not meant to keep people out. It is meant to define where you end and where someone else begins. And when you know where you end, when you can feel the edges of yourself with clarity, no one can consume you. A boundary says, I will not allow this conversation to continue at this volume. A boundary says, I am not available for criticism disguised as concern. A boundary says, my peace is not negotiable. A boundary says, I love you and I will not sacrifice my well-being as proof of that love. I want to talk about sanctuary, not as a physical place. Though a physical place matters enormously, I am talking about sanctuary as a state of being, a frequency, an internal address you return to when the world gets too loud. Your healing requires a sanctuary. It requires spaces in time, in relationship, in your own interior landscape where recovery is not just permitted, it is tended to, where you are not the caretaker, where you are not the crisis manager, where you are simply you, resting in the plain, dignified fact of your own existence. For some of you, sanctuary looks like Sunday mornings with no obligations. For some of you, it is a therapy session, a support group, a long walk with a friend who actually listens. For some of you, and I say this with complete seriousness, sanctuary is simply the decision to not pick up the phone. Whatever it looks like for you, protect it with the same fierce, unwavering energy you have spent for years protecting everyone else. You deserve the protection you have always given so freely away. I want to ground us in something concrete for a moment, because wisdom must have a foundation. The research in positive psychology and in the neuroscience of trauma recovery is unambiguous on this point. Chronic exposure to toxic relationships and environments physically alters the brain. It affects the prefrontal cortex, the part of you responsible for decision making and self-worth. It keeps the amygdala, your brain's alarm system, in a near constant state of readiness. Your nervous system becomes calibrated to danger. You forget what safety feels like in your own body. But here is the extraordinary truth. The brain is neuroplastic. It can relearn safety. It can rebuild its sense of what is normal. Research consistently shows that when people exit chronically stressful environments, even after years, even after decades, recovery is not just possible. It is predictable. Your brain wants to heal. Your body wants to heal. The only thing standing between you and that healing is permission. Your nervous system remembers every hour of peace you have ever denied yourself, and it will celebrate every hour you finally allow. I want to tell you about the women I have sat across from in my work, without their names, with their full permission in spirit. A woman who stayed in a marriage for 31 years because she could not bear to disappoint her mother's vision of what a good wife looked like. She was 63 years old the first time she ate dinner alone at a table she had chosen in an apartment that was entirely her own. She told me I did not know silence could feel like this. I had been confusing noise with love for so long that I had forgotten what love without obligation actually feels like. Another woman, 67, who ended a toxic friendship that had defined her social world for 22 years. She said, the hardest part was the first 3 months. Every time I wanted to call her, I called my daughter instead. Now my daughter and I are closer than we have ever been in our lives. And another 58 who resigned from a senior position in a company that had, over 15 years, made her feel that her worth was entirely conditional. 6 months after she left, she told me, I thought I was my title. I had completely forgotten I was a person. These stories are not exceptions. They are what becomes available when you stop pouring everything you have into a place that is already full of your absence. I want to speak directly to you now, not to an audience, to you. The woman who is watching this and feeling that particular air of recognition. You know the one I mean. You have been wondering for months, maybe for years, whether you are allowed to want more than this. You have been telling yourself it is not that bad. Other people have it worse. At least it is familiar. At least I know what to expect. And I want you to hear me say this as clearly as I know how familiar suffering is still suffering. Predictable pain is still pain, and you specifically deserve more than a life spent managing what was never supposed to be this hard. You were not put on this earth to make yourself smaller so that someone else could feel larger. You were not created to run perpetually on empty so that the people around you never have to feel inconvenience. Your needs are not a burden, they're a biography. They are the story of a whole and dignified human life. Before we close, I want to offer you something practical. Because insight without action remains just a feeling. Three questions I want you to sit with. Not answer immediately, but sit with. Write them down if you are willing. Return to them when it is quiet. First, if no one would be disappointed and no one would be hurt, what would I stop doing immediately? Second, where in my life am I staying not because it is good for me, but because leaving feels impossible to explain? Third, what is one thing, just one, that I could do this week to create a small pocket of sanctuary for myself? Something no one else needs to know about. Something just for me. These questions will not solve everything, but they will begin to map the distance between where you are and where you deserve to be. And the map, my love, is the beginning of the journey. You do not need a perfect plan to begin. You only need to be honest enough with yourself to admit that where you are is not where you belong. We are reaching the end of our time together today. And before I offer you our closing, I want to ask something of you. Not for me, for the women in your life. Because I know that right now, as you are watching this, there is someone in your circle who is exactly where you have been. She may not have the language for it yet. She may not even know she has permission to want something different. But if you send her this video, if you simply text her and say, I saw this and thought of you, and I want you to know I see you, you may be giving her something that changes the trajectory of the rest of her life. And now, I want to close with something I have been saving for the end. Some of you will call it a prayer. Some of you will call it a meditation. Some of you will simply call it the truth. Call it whatever you need to call it. But please receive it. May you find in the quiet spaces of your life the courage you have always had, the courage that has simply been pointing in the wrong direction for a very long time. May you give yourself the grace to honor the years without allowing them to hold hostage the years ahead. May you build yourself a sanctuary, not someday, not when things settle, but now, beginning today, beginning this week, beginning with one honest question asked in the privacy of your own heart. May your boundaries become not walls of separation, but the garden gates of a life that is finally fully your own. May you remember, in the moments of doubt that will surely come, that walking away from what diminishes you is not the abandonment of love. It is the very definition of it. You are allowed to take up space. You are allowed to want more. You are allowed to be well. You have always been allowed. Go gently, dear one. Go free.